Hey everybody, traditional and modern witchcraft will always provide a respectable home for those seeking to connect with 20th century reconstructions of the religions of the ancient world and the neo-Pagan concept of magic. But what about those of us who have no interest in religion, who want a richer experience of witchcraft itself, shamanism, and a magic that predates the conflation with the old religions? It's not an easy question to answer, but we're going to tackle it tonight because we're not afraid of those difficult topics, and we would like you to be a part of that conversation. More on that when we come back. And we are back. Welcome to another installment of The Brew, your podcast for queer spirituality, culture, and magic, especially geared to the solitary practitioner. And so, guys, I'm really excited about this, not only because it's a great topic, but I'm excited to end on such a really I think, groundbreaking note as we end our 2019 season. The season itself, season 4, is not over yet, but we will be taking a break through the winter holidays. So this will be our last live show. And then we will resume back in January. So we'll talk more about that at the end of the program tonight. Tonight, I wanted to talk about something that I think is really important. For so many folks that are introduced to witchcraft and magic and the esoteric traditions, those first exposures might be through books that we read as teenagers or young adults. They might be through television programs or films like The Craft, for example, or Practical Magic or something like that. They might also be in the modern age, it might just be through the internet itself. And so much of what is represented out there is represented in terms of the old religion. The reconstruction, the 20th century reconstruction or reimagining, if you will, of what the old religions were like, and sort of conflating that a little bit with what witchcraft actually was in the ancient world. We end up with the neo-Pagan traditions. And so there are some beautiful traditions out there, some rich traditions for those who are wired for that sort of practice, for a religious practice. I think that's probably one of the easiest ways for folks that are especially coming out of the Abrahamic traditions, to test test the waters. And so they get involved in things like Wicca or stray-go-NEHR-ia. They get involved in neo-Pagan religions, maybe the Norse pagan religion, and so I think that that's fantastic and beautiful and honorable, and certainly represents the traditions of so many of my friends, and so many fellow authors and so many fellow teachers. But it's not my tradition. It's not something that resonates with me. In fact, for me personally, and many of you have heard me say this before, I have absolutely no use whatsoever for religion or religious traditions. I'm fascinated by them. I respect them. I enjoy learning about the various world religions and the traditions that that predate our own, and find that the mythos and the origin stories and all of that are fascinating, because they do play a role in the way that we think and the way that we conduct ourselves in the world today, for better or for worse. But what about those of us who are not interested in religion, who are not interested in the stories and the idea of worship and ceremonial magic and all of the beautiful liturgy and drama and costume of the religious traditions that are built on religions, or the spiritual traditions that are built on religions? What about those of us who are just interested in magic, who are interested in practicing the ancient craft of the wise, which was never a part of a religion, never had anything whatsoever to do with a religion in the ancient world, But how do we connect to that today? What about those of us who follow a solitary path because we find that our own gifts and our own intuitions, maybe our own experience of nature itself or science itself, call us to a practice that doesn't quite fit in. So tonight, what I wanted to talk about, and I hope that some of you who may be watching will join us in that discussion. If you're watching us live right now on YouTube or on Facebook, please drop a comment. Let us know that you're watching. Tell us where you're watching from, so that we can see just who's out there live. But even if you're watching on the rebroadcast, drop a note. Let us know where you're watching from, because that really helps. And let us know what your personal tradition is. Or do you follow one of the neo-Pagan religions, the 20th century religions that make up most of the esoteric practice today? Or do you follow an older tradition like stregoneria or some of the shamanic traditions? And let's talk about that. Let's sort of dig deeper. And I'll share with you while we're waiting for comments some of the reasons why I thought we would end this season. We had two guests that were set to be here, but unfortunately, when your guests are in the medical profession, it invariably means that they may get called away. So one of them was called in an hour ago. The other one was called in from while they were waiting in the green room. We were having a conversation, and they got paged on their phone to come in. So. Unfortunately, they are not going to be able to be here live tonight, but we were going to have a conversation about this for a very specific reason. Not only, as I said, is that, that for me personally as a practitioner, the concept of religion just isn't something that resonates with me. It's not something that works. And I want to be really clear that when I say that, that's not said with disrespect or disdain. Earlier today, I had an experience in one of the groups that I moderate. That is a group of men, of male practitioners, in which somebody got their panties in a knot because someone else made a post and asked about a particular book. I'm not going to mention the book here because, frankly, the book doesn't warrant mention, but it was written by somebody who is no longer a practitioner of Wicca, no longer a practitioner of the esoteric arts. In fact, they are now a fundamentalist Christian. And this book, frankly, was one of the most horrific pieces of trash that I'd ever read. And I read it when I was probably 17 or 18, maybe 19 years old, I think. I recall picking it up in a coffee shop and bookstore, Spiral Circle, that I used to hang out at. And I remember just being stunned by the ignorance and the arrogance of this particular book, which condemned and criticized all of the foundational principles of Hermetics, which showed such disrespect for Wicca when this person claimed to be a Wiccan practitioner. And let me be very clear, I was never a Wiccan practitioner, but I had a lot of close friends who were Wiccan practitioners, including having had the privilege of meeting Sybil Leek, who was one of the most charming and delightfully bawdy practitioners of witchcraft that I'd met when living in Florida. I met her. I had the chance to meet her a couple years before she passed, and so I was offended by that book when I read it. But when somebody said today, "So what do you guys think about this book?" I gave my honest opinion. I in no way condemned any of the people who shared that it was one of the first books that they read. That was understandable. There were better books that were out there that they could have picked up, of course. But we pick up what we pick up and what we're drawn to. And so I didn't condemn anybody who said that it was a great book from their perspective. I simply shared what my perspective was, and immediately started to get attacked by some of the little princesses out there who are all about the appearance and all about playing the toxic positivity routine, and it was very clear that people weren't really interested in facts. They weren't really interested in other people's opinion. They were really just interested in being part of that herd mentality. And so it really struck me that we were on to something tonight in the direction that we were going to go, because I was going to just share with you guys what's in store for us in the coming year, as we start our new year, with a slight change in focus for the Brew, because there are hundreds of podcasts that are available right now, some that are really extraordinary, like the Modern Witchcraft podcast. And please, all of my friends who have other podcasts, don't get mad at me. It just so happens I was listening to the Modern Witchcraft podcast just before going live. So they're fresh in my mind. But, you know, there are so many great podcasts that are focused on the religious witchcraft traditions and those that are derived from that. There are so many great podcasts out there that do a good job of appealing to the general public, and there are publishing companies whose entire brand is all about sort of creating that generic, homogenized presentation of the craft. I wanted to really be a little bit different, because when, as many of you know, in 1983, I was attacked by 4 men, raped and beaten at gunpoint. The gun was put to my head, and the gun misfired, fortunately, but they left me for dead, bloodied, and internally bleeding, behind a 7-Eleven in South Florida. And in the months that followed, my health gradually got worse. I ended up being diagnosed in November of 1983 with full-blown AIDS. It was, at the time, it wasn't even called AIDS, it was called GRID. I had pneumonia at that time. I was told that I'd be dead within 18 months. And when I got out of that hospital, I realized that there was nothing available for people who were going through the sort of experience that I went through. First of all, there was no support for men who were sexually abused. There was even less support for gay men who were now suddenly facing life-challenging and life-threatening illnesses. And so I decided to start a movement. And it's that same sort of passion for filling a void that I try to bring to the Brew. And I hope that over these past 4 seasons that I've done a fair job of doing so. We've had some of the most incredible guests that you could ever have asked to be on the show. People like Devin Hunter and Matt Oren, people like Kai Armand and Chris Allen, and so many other people who've taken time to be with us, Richard Levy, and I could go on and on. And I've considered myself really privileged to have the opportunity to share that. And the focus for this first 4 seasons, over these past 2.5 years, has been just to present queer spirituality, queer witchcraft, and the pagan culture. And I'm finding myself personally isolated further and further and further away from the traditional or mainstream pagan culture, as so many people don't seem to want to deal with the real history of witchcraft. They don't want to deal with the fact that our traditions may be really different in both in origin story and in praxis. And it's sad. It saddens me deeply that some of my friends are afraid to share or promote anything that I do, unlike my having done so for them consistently over the last several years, because they're worried about what their publishers will say, or they're worried about what the blogging platform they write for will say, or what will their friends say if they're seen to have friends who are non-traditionalists, who don't dance to the beat of everyone else's drum. And so I find myself marginalized from that community, and that's okay with me. I'm not going to pretend that I want to be part of that community. Jeff and Ed, welcome. It's great to see you both here. it takes me a moment with my glasses off to be able to see the screen. But I realized after trying my partner's glasses tonight, or my husband's glasses tonight, that a anti-glare coating on the glasses really makes a huge difference. And some folks have said it was really distracting to be looking at my glasses with lights blaring on them. But so I can't see the screen. Um, the thing that I thought I might do though is to sort of reach out, because I know that in some of the groups that I moderate, there are, off the top of my head, I can think of 30, 40 people with whom I've cultivated a relationship over the past year and a half, who themselves are solo practitioners, or they're practitioners of forms of the esoteric arts that are more shamanic in their form, or that are more more in line with the ancient practices of witchcraft. And none of those people are people who look down their noses at, or shun, or disrespect the religious practices like Wicca and stregoneria and the Norse pagan religious traditions. Um, all of them are willing to celebrate the diversity from which we all draw, whether we know it or not. Um, and so I thought, as this new year starts, that the other thing that really started to strike me about 6 months ago was that in doing my show, and filling a need in the broadcast space for a program that brings a queer perspective, a queer witch's perspective, if you will, to the broadcast landscape, I I found myself really finding more and more non-queer folks. And when I say non-queer, I should actually say folks who are from outside the LGBTQ community, but who were allies of us, who themselves might identify or might not identify as queer because they too march to no one else's drum but their own. And so I thought, I really want to expand the show to include these people, and I also still want to keep the word queer in the title, because we recognize that everything about us is queer. Everything about who I am is contrary to um, the stated norms and traditions and conventional wisdom, and that's what I want to bring to my broadcasts. So I thought about it and I worked with it, and we started this group, Brothers of the Craft, and I realized that so many of the men who were from outside the LGBTQ community, so many of them bring so much to the table that I refuse to do a broadcast that excludes my brothers who might identify as straight or who might identify as anything else. I really don't care. So in this new year, we're going to expand who and what we are, to sort of bring that queer perspective that I try to bring every single week, but to embrace and welcome guests like my friend Vanessa Codinu, who was on a few weeks ago, and so many others who are allies of our community. Jeff Nelson and Chris, who bring to the table a perspective that we shouldn't have to be without on a program like ours. And that led me to the point where I started to, hey, Trey Marie, that led me to a place where I started to recognize that it might be time for a movement, a postmodern movement. There's friends of mine, Devin and his husbands are doing a fantastic job of bringing the modern witch program and concept to the marketplace, if you will. Fantastic job of really doing a broadcast, a podcast that's extraordinary. And so what about those of us who are outside of that? What about that broadcast? What about those of us who are non-religious, or who follow our own traditions and don't really quite fit in anywhere? What if there was a tradition of postmodern witchcraft not a tradition, a movement of postmodern witches who live in the 21st century mindfully, who recognize that we don't always fit in with the way that has been things have been done since the 50s. And what if that movement was there to support one another and to say, hey, your tradition is perfectly valid because it's your tradition. And anything I can do to help support that and encourage that and inform that or whatever you need, I'm there for you, because I know that when the time comes that I need someone to be there for me, someone will be there for me. You may not be able to be, but somebody else will. And I'm going to give you a perfect example of that right now. Jeff posts in the comments tonight, I have personal relationships with others, entities, those others worship as gods even, those that others worship as gods even. They don't need our worship, and I view the traditional ways as respectful, but not true for me. And I think that really says it all. There are some of us who have relationships with Hecate, some of us who have relationships with Lucifer, some of us who have relationships with Diana, that are every bit as respectful as our brothers and sisters who are part of the religious traditions. The only difference is that those brothers and sisters might feel called to or a need to worship these gods and goddesses, while some of us may not even view them as gods and goddesses because our relationship is more intimate. So they are who they are. I don't look at Hecate as a goddess. I have a relationship with Hecate. I have a relationship that's with some that are actually physical, material relationships, others that are archetypal, some that are strictly a relationship to the mythos itself. And there should be room in our tradition for that. And if there's not, and when somebody attacks somebody for expressing their opinion, as I was today in my own group, then I have to say, go fuck yourself, because that's not who I'm about, and that's not what we should be about. We should be bigger and better than that, especially in a world that's so divided right now. We should be the ones that are blazing the trail, because we know that some of our forebears were persecuted and at the very least marginalized. So I think that it's time for us to explore a new idea, a new expression of what it means to be a witch in the 21st century. And I think that needs to be an expression that embraces everyone, that moves outside of this ridiculous binary way of looking at everything. As a non-binary person myself, I will always be one of the first ones to welcome our trans sisters and brothers to the table. But beyond that, our male and female friends and everything in between, our religious and non-religious and everything in between. I'm tired of seeing on the internet people who say, oh, that person identifies as a Christo-Pagan, one of those idiots that can't make up their mind what they are. Fuck you. Those people who identify as Christo-Pagan or Gnostic or whatever they happen to call themselves are following their spiritual paths. And if it's not yours, that's fine. You don't have to respect and accept everyone's tradition. You have to acknowledge it and allow space for it. If you don't want to respect somebody who follows the Abrahamic traditions, you don't have to. But you do have to allow them the space to do it. Otherwise, there's no reason for you to think that you have a right to follow your path. And just because you're part of a herd mentality, just because you're part of an accepted brand of quote unquote paganism, doesn't mean that you have more of a right to pick on somebody who's from maybe a less traveled path. And that includes the Christo-Pagans. That includes esoteric Jews. That includes the folks who might follow a Buddhist tradition. And I had somebody earlier this week attacking someone and saying, why is that Buddhist in this group? Well, they didn't understand that that Buddhist person is actually living in a monastery that's practiced witchcraft longer than their ridiculous Gardnerian exclusionary tradition, their offshoot of Gerald Gardner's group that excludes transgender people and excludes this person and excludes that person. That person who's living in a Buddhist monastery has practiced a tradition that's never excluded anyone. And I know because I've been to their monastery. So I think it's time. I think that it's absolutely time. And as Jeff says, how wonderful it would be if everyone would recognize the special in others. We're all special, different, but no one is lesser. You know, Jeff and I have talked about, and he's one of the co-founders and co-moderators of our group of Brothers of the Craft, and we've often talked about the fact that, you know, how needed is it in society today for somebody just to say to somebody who's just stepping on the path, or maybe somebody who's been practicing for 10 or 20 years but has never gotten any support, hey, I recognize your special gifts and I celebrate those. And they don't have to be, you know, wrote or approved by the masses. Because if we did that, there wouldn't be any tradition to begin with, because someone is always innovating, someone's always digging, someone is always having that mystical experience that leads them to that aha moment that they, out of their generosity, share with other people. And those of you that have been watching the show long enough know that a couple weeks ago, Jeff and Chris were on here, and Jeff shared a technology that didn't exist in the ancient world, didn't exist in Gardnerian Wicca, never existed, you know, nobody else ever taught it, that's related to Reiki, and it didn't exist in Reiki, but because he was attuned to his own spiritual path, he innovated and brought to the world another healing modality. Imagine what would have happened if people just criticized him and told my brother that his tradition, that this technology that's so powerful that folks who were watching the show were able to feel the effect of it watching it on video, on replay. Imagine what would have happened if somebody denigrated him to the point that he felt that was no longer valid, that he didn't have a right to explore his own spiritual truth. So what will happen if we move forward as a community, as a movement, as a group of people that watch this crazy faggot on Wednesday nights do his broadcast? And I'm so grateful for all of you who do. But what would happen if we started to support one another? What would happen if we said, you know what, I don't care if you identify as straight or bi or gay or transgender or pansexual or asexual. I don't care if you're in a monogamous relationship or a polygamous relationship. I don't care if you're in a polyamorous relationship or if you're in no relationship whatsoever. I don't care if you're white or black or green or purple. All I care about is that we're respectful. So respectful means working on, as Kai Armand said, working on cultivating a richer and more intimate relationship with our own ancestors to ensure that we're not culturally appropriating, but creating the space in which we can learn from those various cultures and allow that resonates with us to wash over us, not to take ownership of other people's traditions and try to change those traditions or try to pretend that they're ours, but to celebrate them. To be able to say that as a person of Sicilian and Southern Italian descent, that I recognize that part of the tradition of my people comes from Africa, because part of my genetics, part of my DNA is African, and that for that reason I explored Yoruba, and I found parts of that tradition that just really resonate and are beautiful with me. But that's not my tradition. It informs my tradition. And so if we would do that, if we would allow that space our own traditions, our own paths are going to become richer. Because at the end of the day, the differences are only differences in appearance. Magic is magic, and it's our birthright, and it's in our DNA. But when I say that, I'm not one of these people who are saying, oh, magic is in my birthright because my family have 108 documented generations of witches, which they do. And so therefore, as a hereditary witch, I'm a powerful witch. Well, that's bullshit. Because nobody handed me my witchcraft. I had to work for it. And I don't buy into the fact that those people who can claim descendancy from the Mayflower are any more powerful witches either, just because they can claim descendancy. First of all, if your ancestors were one of the witches that were supposedly burned or hanged or stoned, chances are pretty good they weren't witches to begin with. They were just accused of being witches. But every single one of us, while we have to work at our craft and we have to cultivate our craft and cultivate those relationships that are part of the craft, it's still in our DNA. Magic is available to every being on the planet. It's just a matter of deciding to use it, just awakening to its existence in your life. And when you come from that place, then there's no way you can draw lines in the sand. And there's no way that you cannot defend the practice of others, as I did today when I condemned that horrific book, that bullshit book that was written by the guy who now decries all esoteric arts as he thumps on his Bible. You see, if you believe that magic is our birthright, if you believe that everybody has that ability to be a witch in their DNA, then that means when somebody attacks us, as that book does, when someone says, oh, if you really believe that burning a particular color candle works, then you're stupid. Well, then you're going to have to answer to me, because I'm going to get in your face and I'm going to say that that book is therefore illegitimate. So I really hope that that as we move forward, and I had absolutely no idea that I was going to be able to fill a 30-minute show with a rant, essentially. I hope that as we move forward, I hope that we really make a decision to come together. There's going to be some fantastic, exciting things that we're going to announce in the beginning of the new year, including a gathering that's going to take place specifically for those of you that dance to the beat of a different drum, especially for solo practitioners, especially for those who want to explore some of the more shamanic traditions or animistic traditions. So I want to thank you guys who are watching tonight, but I also want to thank those who I know are going to be tuning in later. The folks who watch this going forward, who maybe felt like they were on the fringes because they couldn't stand up for themselves for fear of reprisal. I want you to know that you've got family here, and that we're going to start putting together more and more programming to pull together those folks who are not being served. And I want to end by being really clear. The biggest thing I don't want to see happen by us really kind of mobilizing this movement, and I know that it'll take off. The biggest thing I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see us become the ones who marginalize those who practice Wicca, who practice stray-go-NEHR-ia, who practice the religious traditions. Because those folks are always going to be welcome in our group. They're always going to be welcome on this show. They're always going to be welcome at the retreats and the gatherings that we have, because those folks are our folks. My tribe has no boundaries. And so I hope that you'll embrace that with me. It might be uncomfortable at times. It certainly is for me to be at events where it's all about the group thing, and it's all about the ceremony, and it's all about the drama and the liturgy and the costume that is so meaningful for our brothers and sisters that are part of that religious tradition. And it is uncomfortable for me because it's not my thing. Now, don't get me wrong, I love to wear robes because I hate to wear clothes. Um, it's a matter of, do I feel like the robes make me more magical? No, they make me more comfortable, and they don't require me to wear underwear. So this is going to be an opportunity for us to get messy, to get uncomfortable, for us to really get intimate, not just with one another, but with our ancestors, so that we can actually find out what our tradition really is calling us to do. And nobody gets a chance or has the right to define your tradition or mine except for us. So guys, I thank you for spending this last kind of bittersweet moment of our last live show for the 2019 season. There's still going to be some great content that's going to come to you guys over the next few weeks, including a couple best of the Brew episodes featuring authors like Matt Oren and Devin Hunter. A sneak peek at some of our Inner Alchemy After Dark segments, including the series that I'm doing right now on stregoneria and stregoneria. And then we're going to be back in January with new programming, lots of surprises. And as I say frequently, please share this with folks that you think might enjoy it. Like and subscribe, especially if you're watching us on YouTube. Remember that our blog and our website are going to be undergoing some really exciting transformations this next month or so too. So check all of that out. And I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that I was supposed to share with you guys tonight. Thanks for staying a little bit longer than I had really planned. I thought this was going to be about a 15-minute show, and our guest canceled. But you can't make me shut up. So thank you for being here. Thanks for the folks that are watching us live, and for Sri Marie and Bill and Adrian and Ed and Jeff and let me see if I missed anybody without my glasses on. I think that's everybody. Thanks so much for being here. And as we encourage at the end of every show, we encourage you to stay in the moment, to be grateful for what you've got, because that opens the door for the abundance that's waiting for you. But also know that I'm very mindful that at this time of year, it can be painful for some of us. Loss and family issues and things like that can bring up emotions that are not comfortable. And whether we're here live or we're doing a rebroadcast, you can always know that I'll be here if any one of you are in need of someone to talk to, someone to lean on, someone to bitch at. I'm your guy, because I'm dealing this year with not only missing folks who have passed on, but also missing folks who have shut themselves out of my life because of the current political climate. So we can get through this together. We are a chosen family. We are a tribe. And I'm here for you. I love you and will support each and every one of you. And even though some of you are watching that I've never met before, I know that I can say with confidence that I love you because you're watching the program. And that tells me that you're dedicated to one thing, and that's to your spiritual path. And that's what we're here for. When we say this is about queer spirituality, culture, and magic, then know that queer spirituality means that we don't see any need for drawing lines in the sand. We see differences. I see color. I absolutely see color. I absolutely see race. I absolutely see national origin, and I celebrate it. So stay in the moment. Be grateful for what you've got. Know that you're not alone. And always remember, my friends, the best is yet to come. Deborah, I love you too.